Have you ever considered that the God we worship might actually stem from an interstellar scientist who altered our DNA millennia ago, and that religions could be instruction manuals keeping us unaware of this origin? For 2,000 years, Genesis has been viewed as a story of sin and redemption. But what if it's actually a technical account of genetic engineering? The Garden of Eden, long seen as a lost paradise, changes dramatically when we read texts like the Book of Enoch, describing watchers who came to earth to teach and alter humans. Sumerian tablets, like the Enuma Elish, speak of the Anunnaki, who created man to bear the yoke. Why does this matter? Because it suggests a cosmic power struggle. If Adam and Eve were freed rather than expelled, spirituality shifts from submission to rebellion. The medieval church persecuted those who questioned the dogma of original sin, perhaps to hide that we were designed for servitude, not worship. If we accept this, religions aren't mere paths to salvation, but archives of a cosmic battle for our consciousness. Angels, demons, and prophets could be warring extraterrestrial factions, and Jesus might have been a rebel, not just a passive savior.
What if much of what people believe about religion and the very history of humanity has been off track from the beginning? This is not about denying spirituality, but about considering possible agendas behind ancient texts, sacred doctrines, and traditions that have been passed down through the centuries. Why do so many ancient societies talk about mysterious beings who came from the sky, bringing knowledge and rules that shaped entire civilizations? Many accept religious stories as untouchable, born from pure devotion, but there is a chance that, in certain passages, important details were left out or tweaked to make it easier to control populations. Those adjustments may have served rulers or powerful groups who wanted to keep people obedient to certain rules. If that really happened, which parts of our history were lost or hidden? And what was the real reason for creating so many different versions of the same events? Records from different cultures mention the presence of creatures not belonging to the human world. Sometimes called angels, gods, or Elohim, they are said to have taught laws, rites, and customs. Some worship them as deities, while others feared them as tyrants. Many myths and sacred texts talk about divine punishments or spectacular miracles. But were all these marvels just magical acts? Or could they have been displays of advanced technology meant to impress people living in a time with few resources? Some read official history and see no reason to doubt what is written. However, a handful of researchers, even without full scientific backing, point to gaps and inconsistencies in accepted timelines. Traditional archaeologists often state that civilization began in well-defined periods, but there are sites in different parts of the world that appear older than previously thought. Stone structures, traces of mining, and even out-of-place artifacts suggest the past may be more complex than what we learn in school textbooks. How do we fit these discoveries into mainstream theories if they contradict explanations that have been taught for so long? The point is not to abandon faith or claim that everything is just a conspiracy. The idea is to take a closer look at traditions and notice possible political or religious manipulation over the centuries. If there was an interest in shaping a narrative to keep people under control, that might mean a big part of our spiritual culture is just a partial snapshot of what really happened. What is gained by limiting our perspective? Who profits from holding on to certain dogmas and banning apocryphal books, for example? And what if, in the end, discovering the truth requires digging into the roots we have been told are sacred and beyond question? At this stage, there is an invitation. Each person takes on the role of investigator, combining curiosity, intuition, and different sources of information. Ancient religious texts, archaeological digs, studies of lost languages, and theories that go beyond the mainstream can all be part of this puzzle. Some people find that dangerous because it undermines long-established beliefs. Others feel it opens doors to a more vibrant spirituality, free from the chains and fears planted over time. What will happen if we start looking at the possible hidden messages in these traditions? Anyone who studies Sumerian writings and compares them with passages from the Book of Genesis, for example, finds some eye-catching parallels. In Mesopotamia, records mention the Anunnaki, beings from the sky who ruled and passed on knowledge. In the Hebrew tradition, the term Elohim appears in Genesis. It is often translated as God in the singular, but it might actually be plural, meaning something like the powerful ones. In the Book of Enoch, there are the Watchers, celestial beings who supposedly got overly involved with humanity and fathered the mysterious Nephilim. Is it not interesting that civilizations separated by vast distances describe figures that came from above to interfere with human life? Some say it is nothing but myths made up to explain natural phenomena or to lay down moral guidelines. Others believe those texts may be a coded way of reporting real events passed along in symbolic language by ancient societies. Given the similarities among so many cultures, the idea of contact with more advanced beings gains traction among fans of less conventional theories. Could these gods have been explorers from other planets or dimensions who landed here to pursue their own objectives? The topic of humanity's creation appears in several of these ancient narratives. The Bible talks about Adam and Eve, while the Sumerian tablets describe a very similar process, with divinities molding or adapting human beings. It could just be a poetic metaphor about the dawn of consciousness, but some see hints of genetic manipulation performed by beings who had a specific goal in mind. What if what religions call the divine breath or the spirit of life was actually a scientific process viewed by ancient peoples as a miracle? Another suspicious point is how sacred texts have been selected throughout history. In Christian tradition, apocryphal books were left out of the official canon, even though many of them were considered significant by some communities. Since religion often served as a political and social force, it is plausible that certain passages were concealed to protect the authority of the leaders of that time. What else lurks behind those decisions that determined what the faithful should believe? You do not have to buy into these ideas completely to see that history might not be as straightforward as what is taught in Sunday school or even in traditional archaeology courses. Researchers like Zecharia Sitchin, although criticized, highlight details that do not fit nicely into the official storyline. Michael Tellinger points to sites in South Africa where gold mining might be older than previously imagined possible for human societies. Some parts of their studies have been discredited by experts, but other parts raise important questions. After all, why would prehistoric civilizations have been so interested in extracting large amounts of valuable metals? Maybe mainstream academia avoids stirring this hornet's nest because opening up to these sorts of theories would challenge the idea of a linear past without major technological jolts. But when many cultures talk about sky visitors, similar miracles, and battles among gods, the coincidence is too big to ignore. Could there be a pattern that repeated itself in different places, but was given different names and cultural trappings? And what was the purpose of these beings who arrived promising wisdom, but also seemed to demand worship? For people who dive into the idea that humanity was, at some point, an experiment or engineered product, the classic interpretation of many sacred texts shifts radically. According to this viewpoint, the fall in the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, would not be just a metaphor for disobedience to God. It might be the moment humans gained something certain powerful factions did not want them to have: higher awareness, free will, or knowledge. Some say the serpent represents the group that wanted to free humankind from ignorance, while the Lord in that story was not necessarily the supreme creator of the universe, but a group keeping tight control over its genetic projects. That idea can feel unsettling, but it opens up ways to understand why so many ancient stories describe gods waging wars, punishing entire populations, and favoring specific groups. What if these deities were actually rival groups, each looking after its own agenda? The story of a worldwide flood is present in various traditions. Official explanations say it was punishment for corrupt humanity, but certain theorists interpret it as a kind of genetic cleanup, a way to reset failed or overly dangerous projects. Noah's rescue could be seen as a conservation experiment, like preserving elements that were still of interest. This perspective extends to the figure of Jesus, who, according to conventional Christianity, is the Son of God made flesh, sent to save humanity from sin. People who see the threads of ancient conspiracies believe he came to expose and break the control systems that have been running for centuries. Some cryptic lines in which he says all who came before him were thieves and robbers might refer to groups that used fear and ignorance to rule over the people. The main point here is not to reject the holiness of Christ's teachings, but to show how, in less orthodox readings, each miracle or parable might contain a subtext that questions religious structures and the influence of forces not confined to the earthly plane. Many individuals choose not to explore these theories because embracing them means rethinking their entire worldview. Most religious institutions of any size, whether churches, synagogues, mosques, or temples, are built on the assumption that sacred texts are unquestionable. But if some passages were manipulated during councils, translations, and rewrites, then it is possible that important parts of history were conveniently edited. In such a scenario, free will may have been tampered with, and even the concepts of God or spirituality might have been shaped by interests, blending religion and politics. Meanwhile, there are theories about technology in distant eras. Archaeological discoveries hint that ancient peoples accomplished feats that are still tough to explain today, such as the precise construction of megalithic structures like the pyramids or recorded astronomical knowledge that seems advanced for the time. Some suggest the biblical story of crossing the Red Sea may not describe a pure miracle, but rather technological machinery that parted the waters in ways that appeared divine back then. This does not disqualify faith in a higher power, but it suggests there was something well beyond the local development level of humanity. Stories of massive divine wars, miraculous plagues, and devices called columns of fire leave many scholars scratching their heads. In the case of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities were destroyed for their wickedness. Some people believe a type of energy weapon was used, given the level of devastation. Ancient Hindu texts mention battles involving weapons reminiscent of nuclear explosions. Could these tales simply be metaphors? Or was there a past in which conflicts were fought with tools that later civilizations did not even know how to name? Telling that to a group of mainstream scientists might trigger laughter and accusations of quackery. Academic circles typically say there is no hard evidence that alien spacecraft landed on Earth in ancient times. There are no confirmed remains of machines or solid proof of genetic manipulation. Still, the absence of absolute proof does not erase the growing coincidences when comparing accounts from different cultures and examining certain archaeological sites. Circular structures in South Africa, allegedly linked to gold mining, raise questions. If so much gold was extracted, who benefited from it and why? Were those constructions used as some sort of base for operations that now seem like sci-fi? Writers like Erich von Däniken and Michael Tellinger have popularized these theories, linking them to cave paintings that might show spaceships or figures wearing helmets. For them, reading biblical and Sumerian texts through a technological lens makes sense. Miracles were simply misunderstood by ancient societies who gave a divine label to demonstrations of knowledge far beyond their reach. Naturally, there are strong counter-arguments. Translations of ancient languages may be forced, and many archaeological discoveries have more down-to-earth explanations. Even so, the question remains, why did so many people insist that their founders came from the heavens, taught laws, and demanded worship? From this angle, spirituality is not dismissed, but placed in a broader context. If, thousands of years ago, external forces interacted with humanity, that does not cancel out the possibility of something sacred in the universe. It might reveal that the divine can show up in all kinds of ways, including through visitors who take on the role of gods among less developed communities. Some of these visitors could have meant well, helping humanity progress, while others saw us as mere resources or pawns in a bigger game. This interpretation challenges the core of many religions by asking whether the gods who demanded sacrifices or absolute devotion were truly moral and spiritually superior, or simply more advanced in technology. At this stage, some worry that such ideas undermine faith or trivialize the sacred. However, supporters of these alternative theories argue that real spirituality includes facing reality head-on. Faith does not need to lean on shaky dogmas or myths that serve hidden interests. On the contrary, people say a connection with the divine grows even stronger if it is freed from historical manipulations. The big question is, how many are willing to question what they have learned since childhood to explore possibilities that can shake their deepest beliefs? If parts of these sacred stories arose from outside interference and narrative tweaks, it directly affects anyone who practices a religion. Some fear they would lose all spiritual bearings if they found out their gods were actually groups fighting for power. Others see in that perspective a new reason to seek a more genuine faith, one that connects them to what they believe is the real source of the sacred. This sparks a debate on spiritual autonomy. How much does someone follow a religious system because they feel an inner calling, and how much is out of fear of punishment or hope for a reward? People who consider the possibility of ancient manipulation suggest that fear, guilt, and submissiveness might have been embedded in society centuries ago as ways to tame the population. Rituals and moral codes could be part of a strategy of control. It is not a coincidence that in many stories, these divinities threaten terrible punishment and demand total obedience, while they are described as highly jealous. In some passages, there are episodes of large-scale destruction on divine orders, treating human life as disposable. On the other hand, there are interpretations that find signs of liberation in these same texts, though often filtered through the orthodox lens. Those who speak of a loving God who inspires compassion and personal growth might be aligned with a higher and universal source. It may be necessary to separate what came from that true divine essence from what was inserted over time to reinforce power structures. This is precisely the kind of spiritual gold mining some groups advocate. Reading ancient scriptures with a critical eye, investigating the historical and even archaeological context, and spotting where factions more interested in domination than in spiritual elevation might have interfered. It is not just religion that is impacted. Traditional science, which is usually closed off to the possibility of extraterrestrial contact, would have a hard time accepting that human development was aided by external help. This would change a lot in evolutionary theories, in how we study ancient cultures, and in how we interpret society's intellectual growth. In a way, official institutions resist such ideas because defending the established paradigm is more comfortable. If humanity truly received interventions from advanced beings, many textbooks would have to be rewritten. Nevertheless, free will remains for those who do their own research. There are books, archaeological sites, oral accounts from indigenous and traditional peoples, and even genetic experiments that hint at unacknowledged secrets. Anyone choosing this path might face mockery from those who cling to academic doctrines or religious dogmas, but they could also feel more empowered by not relying solely on hand-me-down stories. The notion that ancient history conceals traces of outside agendas does not necessarily take away from the sense of the sacred. For many, it reveals that the divine connection can be even greater than we think because it is not trapped within institutions or middlemen. If there were elites who shaped religions for their own ends, then the direct personal experience of life's mystery is where genuine spirituality might be found. Faith would not be just about repeating imposed beliefs. Instead, it would become a personal journey of discovery, fueled by ongoing reflection. This awakening calls for a review of what we have been taught about rituals, temples, and religious hierarchies. Since some of those elements may have been introduced to legitimize ruling groups, an authentic spiritual search might mean questioning them and, when appropriate, letting them go. It does not mean that every ritual is meaningless, but motivation matters. Is it coming from the heart, or is it just a cultural habit that keeps the person in a submissive role? Anyone who embraces this idea of ancient interference recognizes that reality is far less black and white than it appears. Even the strictest scientists stumble upon mysteries when they uncover skeletons that do not fit the official timeline or find megalithic structures whose precision defies easy explanations. Some choose to dismiss those discoveries as pseudoscience, but the mounting clues from different angles suggest we are dealing with an unfinished puzzle. Another practical aspect of spiritual autonomy is the idea that if humanity was influenced by beings who posed as gods long ago, the best response now is to develop inner freedom. Meditation, introspection, comparative religious study, and even research into extraterrestrial phenomena can help people better understand our past and also avoid manipulation in the present. This process does not have to exclude faith in a higher power. On the contrary, it can reinforce trust in a divine force that does not rely on complicated rituals or emotional blackmail. Those who promote these ideas often talk about awakening, implying that people should free themselves from the fear and guilt built into many doctrines. If the inheritance of some ancient control scheme is lodged in every mind, breaking that pattern is a liberating act that, for some, is more meaningful than blindly following orthodoxy. The challenge is to look at your own religion, its historical foundations, and its sacred texts, and try to figure out what is genuine experience and what might be the agenda of outside forces. Questioning traditional accounts about sacred origins and powerful beings that may have guided or exploited humanity does not only affect beliefs. It can lead to concrete changes in daily life. Those who suspect deep manipulations took place realize that much of what people do in the name of faith might be a replay of a pattern established in ancient times. Fear of the divine, strict prohibitions, and almost blind reverence for scripture could all be tools to keep the masses in line. But if there really is a divine spark within humanity, why depend so much on outside structures? Why accept pre-packaged truths when we can chase a genuine understanding through direct spiritual connection? That is the central question. What if people are so much more than mere rule followers and actually have the power to tap into higher dimensions without any intermediaries? If that is the case, then real faith might be a personal relationship with the divine, unburdened by implanted fears. For those drawn to esoteric study, it is nothing new that meditation, self-knowledge, and certain consciousness-expanding practices can lead to an inner experience of the sacred. That connection rarely hinges on official doctrines. In fact, it seems to work best when the mind and heart are open to the possibility that the universe is far larger than any institution has claimed. Thinking that the gods of the past could have been extraterrestrials or beings from other dimensions might sound strange, but it can spark deeper questions about who we really are and what kind of bond we have with the cosmos. Throughout history, those who dared to question official explanations were often persecuted. Today, things are better, but there is still an invisible barrier between what is labeled serious knowledge and what is dismissed as a conspiracy theory. The truth is, plenty of ideas once called conspiracies have been verified or at least acknowledged as plausible later on. If more concrete evidence of some ancient intervention emerges in the future, classes and textbooks will have to be updated. In the meantime, those who explore this subject remain on the fringe, stirring up a mix of interest and doubt. In the end, the question remains: if advanced entities shaped our history, does that change your personal spiritual quest? It depends on how you view the sacred. Many come to believe that even if ancient gods were just groups of opportunistic visitors, there is still a higher power that stands apart from the figures in myths and scriptures. Perhaps that higher power has always lived inside each of us. From that perspective, faith becomes something far more vibrant and transformative than simply following religious instructions. Of course, nobody has to discard the traditions they grew up with, because those traditions hold symbols and rituals that can be meaningful and beautiful. But it is essential to ask, what is behind these rituals? Fear? A sincere search? Just cultural tradition? By learning where certain laws and doctrines come from, we see that no religious structure is perfect. When you take charge of your own spiritual journey, you begin to form a more direct bond with what you call the divine. Humanity's past might be a lot more intricate than we think. Visits from beings from elsewhere, genetic tinkering, and power struggles presented as holy wars, all of which could have been part of a very old and partially hidden chapter. Rather than freaking out, some see this possibility as a way to reclaim a genuine connection with something greater, which is not under anyone's control. After all, if there is a real divine presence, it does not rely on factions or dogmas. It depends on each person's ability to awaken and feel that presence within. If everything we know about religion and human origins was influenced by power interests or manipulations, discovering this truth does not have to be depressing. It can be a chance to expand our awareness and find deeper meaning in faith. Above all, remember that each person carries a sacred spark inside, no matter who tried to pose as a god, angel, or master in the past. For anyone interested in experiencing this deeper dimension, there is a set of audio tools designed precisely to make that journey more accessible. Simply follow the link provided on the screen or in the comments to learn more. If this idea resonated with you, feel free to write something like "it made sense to me," which might inspire other people to explore as well.